Hello and welcome to another episode of Writers Talk, a series in which I talk to writers about, well, writing. Only not so much this week because we are in Pride Month, and as has been the case for the last 2 weeks, mostly we're talking about not writing, talking about our experiences in the LGBTQ plus world. And today's guest is, see, this is I'm going to get it wrong here now. Sarah Groenewegen. Sarah G. Go on.
Yeah, it's Sarah G. Much easier. Okay. It's Sarah Groenewegen.
Groenewegen. Which I'm going to get it wrong.
No, it's fine.
But
bearing in mind,
yeah, before
I don't
Sarah, like I was going to say, Sarah's written for me a few times over the past 5 years, and a few which she worked with me, including working with Tim as well. So. Spreading the candy jar envelope. So yes, Sarah, introduce yourself and then we'll proceed from there.
Yeah. Where to start? Basically, I've loved writing ever since I can remember, and scribbled away all the time. Got very involved with Doctor Who fandom from a very, very young age as well, and wrote fanfic. I still love fanfic, but I don't really write it much now. Time, energy, all of that. From Australia originally, so I emigrated over here nearly 20 years ago, which is astonishing. Amazing how time flies. Yeah.
Especially when you cross out the window.
Yeah. And my dad was a migrant from the Netherlands, which is where the name comes from. And I don't pronounce it the Dutch way at all. I mean, I can, but it requires quite a lot of...
I need to hear this now. Go
on.
Oh,
I can't do it now.
Go on. You need prep, do you?
Yeah. It's, previous work, because I now work full-time writing, which is fantastic. Right. But prior to that, it was about 2 years ago, dovetails nicely with a certain pandemic, but it happens. I used to work for the civil service, actually, with the National Crime Agency, as it is now. And actually, before that, had a 6-month secondment in the Netherlands, in which they quietly sort of like said, "Hey, do you want to learn Dutch?" Like, yes, please. It would be helpful. So I did actually learn a bit then, and actually including how to pronounce the name, but that was quite some years ago now. So
was this the first time you learned how to pronounce your name
properly? Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, my dad,
life you got it wrong.
Yeah, pretty much.
Did you know you was getting it wrong your entire life, or was it just?
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah. No, I knew, because for people who have never been to the Netherlands or heard Dutch people speak, the G in particular is really, really hard, because it's a really guttural kind of, and it depends on where you are too, because in Amsterdam it's much more guttural, but it's kind of like coughing up something.
Really phlegmy.
Yeah, that's the bit that I find really hard.
Well, I said the same about Welsh people. I mean, I am Welsh, disclaimer, so I can say this. But when you speak in the real Welsh language, I always jokingly say, if you can spit, you can speak Welsh, because there's a lot of good sounds to it, and I mean, it's obviously an exaggeration, but yeah.
No, but there's a truth to it. Yeah. And similarly with, any language has got its peculiarities. So,
including
English. Yeah.
I mean, I always tell the story of a friend of mine. He came over from Sao Paulo, I think, or somewhere around that region. And he used to tell me the story when he first came to the UK. He was in the shop. He wanted a tin of baked beans, and he says to the shopkeeper, like, "What would they like? What are you looking for?" He's like, "I'm looking for baked beans." And they're like,
"Yeah, gotcha."
Baked beans. He quotes in his sort of Spanish accent, and they're like, well, "I don't know what you mean," because in his head he knew the word naked for some reason and assumed therefore baked must sound the same, because the English language is, it's
there's a logic to
language.
Yeah. English, but very much so. So yeah. But
I mean, only in England do we have like three very similar sounding words that mean completely different things.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
go figure, right?
Yeah. And
Anyway,
different
your
spellings.
story. Sorry, continue your
No,
history.
that's cool. Yeah, and bearing in mind it's Pride Month, as we're talking about that, I came out to myself when I was 25, so actually quite late. That was still in Australia. Um, I mean, I've written about it in an essay that I wrote for Queers Dig Time Lords, which Mad Norwegian Press published quite some time ago now, actually. But basically, it was a bunch of us who were pretty much running an aspect of Doctor Who fandom in Australia at the time, and pretty much everybody came out at the same time.
Huh. I do remember.
It was amusing.
You must remember this because you're of a similar age to myself, I believe. I might be doing you misjustice here, but I think you're of a similar age. I'm pretty sure. Back in the old days of Doctor Who fandom, and it's not untrue to say that it did seem to have a lot of LGBTQ people in it.
Yeah,
a huge amount, in fact. Whereas now it's more balanced, I think. But certainly back in the day, it did seem to be the case. Like when I went to the occasional convention, it did seem that 90% of the people there were either gay or lesbian or bi. Of course, it's broader now, but it does seem to be.
No, very, very much so. And it was certainly of a time and of a place, all of that kind of stuff too. So, but because we had our own support network, because we all and ended up joking, of course, that the few token straights, pardon that language, but of the time, and so on. So it was actually pretty healthy and good to sort of like have that connection and everything, and all the friends and so on. And I also ended up doing my master's degree on Doctor Who fans, because that's the kind of person I am.
Why not? Write about what you know.
So I am actually qualified.
Check you out. You've got letters after your name, haven't you?
I do, yes.
Yeah. What do they all mean?
Right. Well, the BEM doesn't stand for Bug-Eyed Monster, but it's quite handy to pretend as such. No, and it all dovetails this. Basically in 2016, I think it was
I do remember.
Yeah, it was 2016.
Yeah.
I arrived home, normal, and it was a letter from HM, like the Queen, basically, but not from her. Obviously,
she wrote it. Here you go.
But it did have the stamp on it, on Her Majesty's.
That's good enough for you.
Just kind of like, whoa, okay, what's this?
What have I done?
And on opening, basically, it said, do you know I've been nominated for a British Empire medal, essentially for my services to promoting homosexuality. Which is one of my preferred ways of putting it. It was really for promoting equality in the workplace for LGBTQIA plus people, and also for my work in law enforcement, which is National Crime Agency stuff. And I remember sort of like going, this has got to be a joke. Because, like, seriously, this doesn't happen to people I know. And it wasn't a joke. And again, this is something I've written about, and it's on my website and LinkedIn page, basically. But did seriously consider, do I really want something that's so connected?
I seem to recall you telling me that you were a bit like, I don't know about this. Yeah.
I mean, it's a decision to sort of make, but for lots of different reasons, but not least of which is sort of like, oh, actually, hang on a minute, this is the Queen, in effect, because it was for the Queen's birthday honours. Right. Of that particular year, and the government of the day saying, no, that's good that you should be doing this, makes it a pretty powerful weapon in some ways to people who are of that side of politics, who sort of go, oh no, we don't approve.
Yeah, Queen does, so
yeah, well, the Queen does, so in your face. Things have moved on. essentially. So for that, there were other reasons as well, but accepted it. I was really, really pleased that I did. So yeah, so it was a bit of a blast. So that's the main one.
But does this make you a dame or anything?
No. So one of the great ironies, I think, of my career, because I knew next to nothing about the honours. I mean, beyond what people talk about, that kind of thing. Learned quite a lot about what they are, and how it sort of like works, and that kind of thing. And then one of the last jobs I had before I left the NCA was actually being in charge of the team that looked after the nomination process for the agency. So I learned an enormous amount about how they really work. And I think, just as a quick one, I mean, obviously certain people, politicians, etc., it's a slightly different system. But for most people, there's a nomination process. So if you're kind of puzzled as to why some people have never been nominated, people could actually look at nominating them. Or alternatively, if they're people who have been in the public eye for a long time and you're sort of going, well, why don't they? It's entirely possible that they've said no for whatever reason.
Right. So if you said no, then obviously you wouldn't have heard.
Yeah, you wouldn't know.
That'd be it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would be entirely up to me if I decided to break the because they do say please don't tell anyone.
But they can't make you not, I suppose.
Not really.
No.
So it's that sort of things. And John le Carré, who's one of my favorite authors, he never received any British honour, but did receive French, I think, and possibly German. Right. But he's written it, like he wrote about it in one of his autobiographies, that it was because the French, I'm fairly sure it's the French one, it was because it was for his books. And he sort of felt, well, I deserve it for that. It's up to him.
A lot of effort. So yeah.
Whereas the problem with the British one is it's for anything, pretty much. And he didn't want to get an honour for stuff that he didn't feel as though he should get an honour for, which it would probably be for his quite short career in the the spies, basically, all his espionage work, which he just didn't think rated it, but people would associate it with that. And so, well, that's fair enough.
But with yourself, obviously, the reason you got nominated is obviously something, as you said, you can definitely use to your advantage, if necessary. So yeah, and it's a good recognition to have, for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, in terms of what it is, hey, it is pretty cool.
Well, like you say, it's not like, it's not the sort of thing that happens to people, as you said, I can't
really
know anybody personally other than yourself who's had such an honor given to them. So yeah, I mean, pretty cool.
Yeah. And as a Doctor Who fan, of course, the BEM side of it does have that double thing.
That's like, well, actually, what it really means is inside. Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay, let's touch upon writing a wee bit, just because it's writers' talk, and apparently that's what we do. I did ask a similar question to Joe Lidster last week. I don't know if you watched it.
Part of it.
Were you writing before you came out?
Yeah.
I know you said fanfic, but like professionally or just
professionally? Not really. Like sort of bits and pieces. I'd done a few sort of short stories that I sent into a couple of newspapers just to run sort of competitions and that kind of thing. But and really, I mean, none of it was published, but it was just various bits and pieces. And there was a play that I wrote which never got performed, but the ABC, Australian Broadcasting, I always forget if they're commission or corporation now. Anyway, the Australian version of the BBC, effectively.
Yeah.
They had a competition at one stage, which was basically asking for script ideas for new stuff. And that was before I came out that I did that. So, and actually, they held it, and I got lovely sort of like letters from their head of commissioning and stuff like that, which is actually, you know, pretty very encouraging. But looking back on it, there is no way they would have had the budget.
Right?
Sorry?
You kept all the letters, yes?
Oh yeah.
Because I remember I certainly with because way back in the midst of times, back in like literally the late 80s, the end of, I was kind of cajoled by my mother, which I suppose was nice of her, into actually submitting stuff to the BBC for Doctor Who itself.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as I've told the story many times, it was literally sent just as the Doctor Who production office was closed down.
Yeah.
But I've got a nice letter from Cartmel saying, no, thank you for sending this. It looks very interesting. However, shut down, but do send it once we're reopened. Obviously, towards 2005, I didn't do that. I probably should have done, just for cheek. But I kept that letter for the longest time, but I lost it in transit somewhere along the way.
It happens, yeah.
Sadly. So yeah, the question I was going to ask though is specifically, as a writer then, having written before you came out, did your writing and how you write and how you approach your characters change after you came out?
Yeah.
Still play with that kind of, you know,
yeah, because I definitely do find my writing in both nonfiction and fiction is self-exploratory to a degree. It might not come across obviously to readers, but some obviously do, but a lot not. But I think it's always been there in terms of sort of as I was just thinking back to that particular piece that I sort of wrote that the ABC was interested in but not enough. It didn't have specifically gay characters in it, but I repurposed it as one does over the years, and actually
once or twice
the creature, the monsters in it, actually ended up in a Big Finish short story that I wrote as the monsters there. So there was the Bushranger story in Repercussions, edited by Gary Russell.
Too?
Yeah.
I'm sure I must have known this, right? Because that was my
that's the one.
Work in this book as well.
Well, there you go.
See, we're all connected. Now, of course, the reading glasses need to come in age, right? Yeah. Oh, yes. So you are. Yep. You're literally 3 people under me. So me, you and Joe. Nice. I must have read it then. I have to reread it. Hang on, let me just stick it on the shelf as part of your. Cool. Sorry, Daughters of Earth.
Yep.
No, it doesn't fit there. Sorry. Live TV, this is, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Squeeze you in there.
That's cool.
Right, see? If I knew that, I'd have popped it already. I often knew, but, you know, middle age, right?
Yeah.
More specifically then, because with the Leffler Stewart stuff, obviously I'm more familiar with that. But as I'm aware, you have written other stuff, clearly, stuff that I had forgotten about. Pearl, the character Pearl from your 2 short stories of the how can I forget the title? So we played the title twice.
Well, one was Locked In, the other one was The Lock-In.
Lock-In. There we go. I knew the L in it.
Yeah.
So many stories in my head. Okay, so Perlu, of course, is in that version. One as a series of letters by her, the other one seen through Alistair's point of view as an older man, but in his younger self's body, or was he in Samson's body?
He was in Samson's body, but yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Too many stories. Pearl, was there any autobiographical sides to her? Because I've got a vague impression that maybe there were.
Not
I don't remember.
Not. There will be sort of like a bit glancing wise, but actually she's much more based on the SOE sort of like resistance fighters during World War II. Right. In fact, but obviously that world, I've drawn on some of my experiences from working in law enforcement effectively for 20 years, which it's difficult because it was a complicated series of things that I did in that job. But mostly I was what's called an intelligence analyst,
Right.
which is a fancy way.
Intelligence analyst, no?
Well,
Or maybe I was.
that might breach the Official Secrets Act. Joking.
Or is she?
But I mean, it was a job that I started in Australia, which doesn't have the Official Secrets Act. It's got its own version of it. But it's a fancy way, basically, of saying doing research into people who want to keep their stuff secret. In the world that I was working in, it was criminals, predominantly organized crime. But obviously, there's an enormous overlap with spookier people. So spies and that sort of like stuff, plus military, etc., etc., etc. So one picks up various bits and pieces. So so in that sense, yeah, I mean, there's nothing specific. Like there was nothing that sort of like went, okay, Pearl is that particular person that I worked with at one particular time or whatever. There's none of that.
Right.
But there's definitely bits where it's just sort of like, well, that's the kind of way that you talk about these sorts of things.
I might be mistaken. I'm just looking at them on the shelf over there. I'd get up and check, but then I'd have to get up again.
Yeah.
Don't look like we haven't planned it at all. The first version, well, the letter version of the story was Habit Files 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, yeah, because there's a green cover. So that would have been our second Habit Files. So I think Pearl was probably the first openly gay character in the series then.
Quite possible.
I think so, because I know obviously Owen's been there since day one, but because he's in the 70s, obviously he's more subtle about it, because obviously it's a 70s, so it can't be too, because you wouldn't have been that obvious back then, most. Yeah. But Pearl obviously was from 2011, because the letters were, of course, on either side of the Brigadier's deathbed, which is a nice, poignant moment. So you probably have the distinction of having the first openly gay character in the series. So
that's pretty cool.
Okay. Good for you.
And on a slightly related note,
go on.
Because I wrote 3 stories for Big Finish. One in their first collection of short trips, Zodiac,
right,
edited by Jack Rayner. And the second one was in her 3rd book, The Muses. So it was one of them as well. But basically, at one particular point, Gary Russell was sort of like trying to work out who might have been the first openly lesbian writer for the range. And I think we worked out that I was openly being the key there. So there may or may not have been a few. Yeah.
Were you openly so then?
Yeah.
Okay. Because like you said, there probably were quite a few, almost certainly, in fact. We know for instance, Joe Lidster, when he started writing for Big Finish, he definitely wasn't out. I mean,
no, there were openly gay men who were writing, and bi men, obviously, but it was more the women's side. So on that one. So but that's pretty cool.
Nice. And you are, from a Left with Stuart point of view, surprisingly so, actually, considering who's in charge. Well, I say in charge, it's not quite over yet, almost over. A very openly gay man who really doesn't care if we know or not. You actually might be. Hello, my cat.
Hello.
I know this is going to happen. She does this every now and then. Like, go that way.
It's Zoom.
On my keyboard. Go on that way. Go on. Thank you. You might be one of very, very few openly gay people writing for the series, actually. There's obviously me, there's you, just scanning through the list on the shelf, and I can't actually see any others, shockingly. Oh, it's busy. Right, 1 second. This is fun.
No,
I'm off to get this one edited. Hang on a second. Thank you. Just the postman. I might leave this in because it's more fun. But yes, I think just scanning through it, honestly, I can't see. Oh no, there's Ali. So yeah, I think one of and James recently. So 4 of us. That's impressive, actually.
Yeah.
Or not impressive, depending on how you look at it when you think of it. Because as we said, there does seem to be a large percentage of gay followers of Doctor Who. So you'd think that would equate loads of more gay writers for Doctor Who, but I don't know.
It varies, but
Not.
yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe
Yeah.
not. Weird. So now we sidetrack completely, and I've lost any questions I may have had. So if you got anything to say, just say it anyway. Because I try to make this not so much an interview, just a conversation. So
Yeah, which is cool.
Off the cuff is more fun sometimes, and in this house, clearly off the cuff happens a lot.
Yeah.
Especially with this little
Well, it wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without a cat.
Well, this does seem to be the case. I have got 2. Well, I've got technically I've got 2, but I would say I've got 2.5.
Right.
Then confuses people because they're like, "You've got half a cat." It's like, well, no, but my neighbor's cat, he basically lives here too, so it's kind of like half mine now. Because he's been coming in here since he was like, I don't know, 8 weeks old, and that was 3 years ago. So I got 2.5 cats. But yes, back to writing. So other than Big Finish and Candy Jar, what else do you do?
Yeah, well, like I
said, full time now. So what do you do?
Yeah, it's been hard trying to start this during a pandemic. Plus everything else, which is sort of like really, and I know you'll know this a hell of a lot more than I do, but it's been interesting to see how publishing as a whole has been dealing with this, like paper shortages and all sorts of stuff like this. But fortunately, I'm in a position where actually I can take the time to sort of like do stuff. But my other key thing that I've been working on, nicely sort of like dovetailing with the production of A Most Wanted Man, I've got to say, I couldn't have planned it better. is a book called The Disinformation War, which is actually scheduled for publication next year. So a bit slower in terms of production, but it's been interesting in terms of how this has been going. But that's it's a spec fic, technically, much more political than science fiction, but it's under the SF banner. Okay. And it's with a new imprint for intersectional feminism. The publisher is Gold SF.
Right.
And it's an imprint of Goldsmiths University Press, which I hope I've got the name of them right. But they also work with MIT Press, which is pretty exciting. In terms, because MIT are handling the US side, which is amazing. The first book is about to be published in September of this year. It's a collection of
part of a series.
It's an imprint more. Una McCormack, whose name of course would be familiar, for very nicely providing the forward to my first novel.
Yeah.
She basically is a fan of the Virago and Women's Press, basically, that had an imprint for science fiction in the 70s and 80s and possibly into the 90s. But an awful lot of this has sort of like vanished. And she was basically at a lecture or something like that, conference, something that Goldsmiths was running. And she mentioned about how it would be really cool if there wasn't a feminist science fiction sort of imprint that caught up with today's world.
That's the trick, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, Una is hugely intersectional. She's great on a lot of this stuff. And yeah, so they did a call about 2 years ago. And yeah, it's interesting to set up an imprint as well during a global pandemic.
Well, it's bizarre. I mean, the pandemic, it's obviously caused a shitload of problems in all kinds of ways, but it has kind of motivated a lot of people to be more productive, do stuff they've always wanted to do, because suddenly people had the time to do these things. Certainly writers, it seems, a lot of people
Yeah.
who were aspiring to write suddenly thought, I've got the time. So,
Yeah.
but what I've noticed so far, there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of books, certainly in the sci-fi realm, certainly in the Doctor Who type of realm, that actually seem to be dealing with it in any way yet. Which
Yeah,
is
because
curious.
lead time's interesting. I mean, the disinformation war is, as the title might suggest, very much about post-truth,
God.
disinformation, all of this kind of stuff. Although very much it's yeah, I mean, it's a big part of it in terms of the online thing, and it's set, I don't know, a few years in the future in Britain. I keep describing it as a bit of a diagonal step forward as opposed to a sidestep. Although I don't mention political parties or names of contemporary people.
Like the urge to do so.
Yeah. But I think when people read it, they'll work it out pretty quickly.
It's like the book I'm working on, or trying to get into, as you may have noticed from my various tweets on the thing. I'm in the stage of, I know the story I want to write, but you know, you've got to get in the zone when you're writing. Writing's not like editing. You can just sit down and crack on. You've got to be right. You've got to be there. I know exactly what this book is, and it's not dissimilar to what you're talking about in that it's set, finally, it's a book set in the now, which obviously Left with Stewart type stuff is always in the past. So it's nice to deal with modern people again. And it's very much about the pandemic and the effects it's had on people. Because I found, I'm not saying it's true for most, but it's certainly true for some people. I've spotted that I tend to find that people, we're not designed to be around the same people all the time. I don't think. I think it'd be the best way in the world, even if you've been married for decades, marriage is survived by having your own things too. But obviously the pandemic forced a lot of people to have to be around each other all the time. And as a result, I've seen a lot of relationships completely fall apart sometimes in just small ways, sometimes catastrophic ways. So this book is very much about looking at that and seeing the damage this pandemic's done on a personal level to people. And the fact that it happens to be two gay men is purely coincidental, I'm sure. Coincidence. It's kind of fun. I don't exactly know what I'm doing, but it's just a case of getting my head into it. But it's nice, like you said, to deal with something more today. And
it's and this, I mean, the pandemic's mentioned in it because I know there's been people sort of like discussing online whether or not we should mention it or not. I've kind of of the opinion that I don't like the fact that, for example, the 1918 to 1920 flu pandemic got buried because it's astonishing, and various other pandemics that have actually happened, you know, like collective consciousness has just gone, no, let's pretend that never happened. And because collectively we kind of forget, and to me, surely it's better to learn from it. But equally, totally get that people's personal sort of journeys through these things, our mileage difference is very different. So it's kind of like, if you don't want to, that's fine. No one should force you. But at the same time, if you do, then go for it. For me, the world that I've set the disinformation war in, it is very close to ours, but it's not ours. And to not mention it would just be wrong. Especially given the fact that disinformation concerning COVID and everything, as well as misinformation, but this is specifically about active disinformation, is huge. So it's kind of like, to ignore it would be really weird. But then the characters are fun. There's three main sort of like point of view characters, and one's Arrow Ace, which has been quite interesting to explore that side of it. There's a lesbian couple as well, although one of them is very much into open relationship, the other one isn't, but kind of goes along with it.
I see doom on the horizon.
Which is a bit. And then the other is he thinks he's heterosexual, but he's never actually had a relationship with anyone. And he's in his early 50s as well, so it's like, you know, and the Arrow Ace character basically observes, maybe you're asexual or something, and he sort of goes,
no.
oh,
I didn't think of that.
I'd never thought of that. I mean, obviously there's more to it than
obviously
that.
Okay, look, time is ticking again. As I always say, we don't want Zoom to cut us off. It probably won't, but
who knows?
it's going to happen eventually. It's going to happen eventually. So before we go, let's talk about this quickly.
Yes,
because so this, like you say, Daughters of Earth was your first actual novel, yeah?
Yes. To actually be published, yes.
This would be your second novel to finish, or?
Yep, second to be published, yep.
Right. To finish your disinformation book, not just generally, before that one, or? I
actually finished the main draft of it before, but had to rewrite it for good reasons. But it'll be my third published, whereas A Most Haunted Man is my second published. Cool. So
tell the viewers why they should get this. I mean, even if they're not followers of the series, because I like to think, and I hope it's true, that you can pick up more or less any Leffer Stewart novel and still read it as a novel.
That's certainly the impression I get. I go to quite a few science fiction conventions, Eastercon, the main British one being the key one, and a few people there sort of, I mean, obviously Doctor Who is something that you can't really escape from, but not everyone watches it. I know, weird. And certainly not everyone has memories of the early series, for lots of different reasons, but they've been sort of picking up the various Lethbridge Stewart books and sort of, and I don't think in order or anything like this, but they seem to enjoy them, which is really, really nice. But I do think particularly A Most Haunted Man, you don't really need to be steeped in with everything, because while it is set in a quite different sort of like time period in terms of the Brigadier, etc., as you well know, it's not really attached to it. So while there's nods to, and certainly inclusions of various characters and stuff like that, you don't need to know them.
Well, yeah, because one of the not providers, one of the ingredients, shopping list, whatever, when I first came to you was because it's in that period where the Brigadiers basically forgot everything practically. Gives you this nice clean slate to just not having to worry about the continuity. And we'll add a little bit here and there because obviously it's nice for the long-term fans. But like you say, it was very deliberately written to be its own thing because we don't have to worry about it, which gives you a lot of freedom.
Yeah, hugely. So, and there are definitely things in there that people will pick up, but you don't need to know them to actually sort of like understand the story. And I think, well, hopefully, I mean, it's always difficult to talk about your own work.
I don't know until people tell me, because slightly biased.
But the few people who have read it so far that are quite independent have enjoyed it because they've sort of been guessing stuff in terms of what might be happening and so on. And nicely didn't actually guess the ending. Yay.
Well, what I found was quite funny, completely unintentional. But you've got a copy of it. But the Alistair who's punching the other dude, because obviously you don't want to give it away, because of his fists happen to be blocking that part of his mouth and the guy's like that, it oddly to me looks like he's punching Ian Chesterton.
Yeah.
Which is quite.
I hadn't noticed, but it's
it's that I looked at it when I first got, because I've already seen it on the screen, but seeing it in person, you can see details you don't necessarily spot before, and I'm like, completely accidental, I'm sure. Well, I assume. I don't. Martin may have done it on purpose. I don't know. I don't think so. But it does look like the Briggs punching Ian Chesterton, which of course is quite funny because that's who he should have been had things gone according to plan.
Yes.
Pure luck, really,
So I think in terms of having people being able to actually guess things wrongly is really cool.
Well, that's part of the fun. When you're setting a mystery, you also want to deliberately red herring them and send the blind alley occasionally, because you don't. But I suppose the trick is you want to give them enough clues that they can work it out. So hopefully it'll click for them just a second before it does for the character.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Yes. Yeah.
But I read so many
payoff.
of people who are like, oh, this makes no sense. It's like, well, pay attention. All the answers are there. Because, you know, you see this on Twitter all the time. People are like, oh, it didn't explain this, didn't explain that. It's like, it did. It just didn't tell you. Because you just got to put it together yourself, because that's part of the fun.
Yeah.
Would hope.
And different things appeal to different people too. I mean,
yeah.
I like puzzles and stuff like this, if that kind of thing, and actually try to work through, who's doing what and what's really behind it. And also like patterns. So Peter Greenaway is one of my favorite film directors. And the films that he makes, like Z and Two Noughts and things like that, where you've constantly got patterns going on in the background.
Right. We do need to wrap this up. As I say, we will continue after this, because I'm in no rush. If you're in no rush, we can keep nattering about nonsense for a bit. Although I do have something important to say to you afterwards. But it's off the record for now.
Sure.
So before we go then, what advice would you give to, because you know we're still on Pride Month, so what advice would you give to any person who is struggling with their sexuality or gender issues based on your personal experience? I know you're very actively involved in such things, so
I think trying to find a support network that's not judgy is really, really helpful, and there are plenty available out there. So social media can be toxic, but it can also be really, really supportive. And I think, trying to sort out, and it's hard, what's toxic and what's not. But generally, I think, as a rule of thumb, if it's making you feel uncomfortable and feeling bad about yourself, then it's probably toxic and you should probably get out of it. But there are lots and lots and lots of spaces which are actually really, really helpful, and will actually sort of like help and just sort of work it through. Plus there's absolutely tons of material to read out there as well, in terms of things. So those would be two pretty key things. And don't give up. I think is also another really, really key one.
Persevere, because that's important. Otherwise it's it can be hard, even today, where it's a whole lot easier today than it ever was for certainly our generation, but it's still not obviously always going to be easy for some people struggle more, others quite happily just like, I'm gay, don't care. Some proper internalize it. So don't give up, and like you say, find a good support network who can help you feel comfortable in yourself. Really good advice. Okay, right, I'm going to wrap up. So thank you, Sarah, for joining me and having a good old natter.
Thank you.
Finally come face to face with you after 5 years. It's a weird thing that I can work with people for years and never see them. For a century. It's a weird place, isn't it? But so thank you for that. To everybody at home, I hope you enjoyed it again. And
thank you.
Next week we've got it's another one with me and Tim. But to keep the pride, we're going to be discussing. I believe we decided we discussed in an episode of Cucumber. Well, Russell T Davis's kind of sequel to Queer as Folk, sort of. And if it's the episode I choose is the one I get, which hopefully I will, it's a pretty dark episode, so that could be quite a discussion. But anyway, until next week, I've been Andy. Sarah's been, Sarah, clearly. And goodbye from me, goodbye from Sarah.
Cheerio, and thank you.